Hi, I'm Craig Smith, and this is Eye on AI. I'm a special government employee at the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and in this role, I'm serving as the host for NSCAI's podcast series on the Commission's work. This is the first episode of several looking at the Commission's second quarter recommendations to Congress. In the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress established the National Security Commission on AI to consider the methods and means necessary to integrate artificial intelligence into the national security and defense needs of the United States. The commission consists of 15 commissioners selected primarily by Congress and is led by former Google Chief Executive Eric Schmidt and former Deputy Defense Secretary Bob Work. This week I speak to Mignon Clyburn, an NSCAI commissioner and longtime regulator at the FCC, about recommendations to increase competency in artificial intelligence at the Department of Defense and other government agencies. Ms. Clyburn talked about establishing a National Reserve Digital Corps with a scholarship program modeled after the ROTC, and the creation of a United States Digital Service Academy, similar to the U.S. military academies that would mint a new class of civil servants with deep technical knowledge. I hope you find our conversation as interesting as I did. Mignon, I'd like to hear about who you are, where you came from, how you got to the commission, what kind of work you've done in your career. And then I'll start asking you some questions about these really fascinating recommendations.
My name is Mignon Clyburn. I spent about 19 years in regulation, 11 years at the state of South Carolina, being an investor-owned utility regulator, and just over 8 years at the Federal Communications Commission, primarily focusing on technology, that intersection of broadband in health and education and the like. It's been almost 20 years for me just caring and looking at how technology and other what I believe are critically essential services, how can they be best made affordable, accessible for all people? So bridging gaps, bridging divides, addressing critical needs in the community, and leveraging technology and utilities and the like to make things go more smooth. That's been a part of my DNA for nearly 20 years.
Wow, wonderful. Did you come to the commission from the FCC?
I did. I am a congressional appointee. Things are divided in different silos, so to speak, in terms of different interest groups. I met Chairman Pallone through my interaction at the FCC because he is on the requisite committee that would definitely intersect with the FCC. And so he got to know me and he noticed my focus on the community interest, individuals and their need to be connected and empowered by way of technology. And he respected that part of my character and wanted that voice to be a part of the commission structure.
And then how did you get to this particular line of effort 3, which is looking at the digital workforce in the government?
Well, I am from the state of South Carolina, which is a very challenged in some ways, rural primarily state. Every day I am in this state, I don't have to go far from my birth home or my current abode to see those glaring disparities that are no fault of those students or individuals who live in certain communities. But it is a challenge and honestly a responsibility for people like me who are decision makers. I came into this space recognizing that utilities as well as technology that intersect those spaces are critical in order to uplift communities, to keep individuals safe and warm. You dial 911 from a line. And so that is important for people to have access and to be able to afford to pay for it. And sometimes those intersects do not happen organically without government assistance.
On the specific recommendations that have come out after the second quarter, your line of effort begins by talking about the severe shortage of AI knowledge in the DoD, Department of Defense, and other parts of the government. And I've spoken to people about this before, and I don't have a good sense of it. Was the commission able to quantify that shortage or that skills gap?
Well, I appreciate that question, and it comes with an acknowledgement. It is very difficult to quantify the shortage of AI knowledge in government, and that is for two reasons. First, the government does not have a system for measuring or tracking its AI knowledge. I have to admit that up front. I am not aware of any formal gap analysis that has been conducted by the U.S. government to formally capture the current and future digital workforce needs across the whole of the federal government or state government. Now, you will note, as you just mentioned, that our first quarter recommendations are designed to address and resolve that issue. But I want to make a second point. The government has only started to explore what it will do with AI. So we're just at the beginning stages of that. As the government builds its workforce, and particularly when we're talking about national security and developing those unique needs with the world as our oyster in mind, government will gain a better understanding of those work requirements. So I just want to put it out front that those are two challenges that we recognize and are attempting to address. But at the end of the day, to the core of your question, there is a personnel shortage. And our commissioners have literally interviewed hundreds of government officials. And we have heard two refrains that government leaders need to better understand AI, its potential, its limitations, and what their organizations need to do to capture that. The second is that government does not have enough technical talent. You have to recognize the issue and face it head on. So you're right, to ask that question. And this commission is rightly focused on addressing those severe shortages. We are not recruiting enough people with digital talent. Those on-ramps, so to speak, are not large enough. The government is still wrestling with, whether or not it has the right authorities to do that. We addressed it in the first and second quarter recommendations. And as government struggles to retain AI talent, again, we need to face this head on, and we're going to look at that part upcoming in our third quarter recommendations. There's a mismatch between talent and demand. You hear that all over the place, but it's especially acute in government. There's a lot of competition out there. Let's just, be honest. You've got industry, which is a big, tempting place for people to go because industry can pay more. You've got academia, where some people really want that autonomy, to be able to create and expand. There is government. It's a great place to be, great place to work. But when you talk about the hierarchy of either economic or the different types of enrichment, it is very difficult for government to be one or two by way of where's the most attractive place to go or where, when you start evaluating, when you look at money and the rest of the elements, government is tough. It's tough for government to recruit that talent. So I know I went a little long on that, but it's really, really important for us to, I think, face head on what the challenges are and what we can do as a collective about it.
You note in the recommendations that there have been agency-specific efforts to build a digital workforce, but that those efforts have been inadequate and are inefficient. And I can certainly see the value of having an overarching effort that applies to all of government. But I'm just curious, why do you think agency-specific efforts have failed to solve the problem? Is it because they're competing against each other? or there are different levels of attention given to the problem at different agencies. So there may be an agency with projects that need talent, but the head of the agency isn't really focused on filling that need.
I have this very interesting quirk about me that I often pick a word of the day. And sometimes it comes way out of, whatever field it is, left, right, or I don't know, but it comes at me. And my word of the day is the answer to your question, and it's scale. Scale. The biggest issue we've seen is scale. The government needs AI experts, but it also needs software developers, computer scientists, people that can work on hardware and other components of the digital workforce. Government will never be able to develop AI solutions if we don't address this critical issue of scale. Now, again, I don't want to make it sound like nothing is being done, because there are some great agency-specific initiatives that are going on, but none of them, I have to affirm, none of them are enough to recruit the type of people that will enable the modernization that government leaders have been calling for. Sorry to be that blunt, but there it is. And that's where we stand.
One of the things you focus on is expanding current scholarship for service programs, which have been very successful, expanding them to increase the number of graduates with technical backgrounds so that they can join the government as full-time employees. The amount of money that was talked about in the recommendations for that seemed very small. It didn't seem like it was a huge investment. Is there a reason why you wouldn't want to expand that even further, as opposed to some of the other things that you recommended and that we'll talk about?
Well, I will say that there is nothing more important when we look at our needs and the challenge of the day than what you just put forth. To having a trained and educated workforce that is diverse, meaning, military and civilian. But I will say that I don't care who you speak to at any level of government, money is an issue. And we have to be mindful of that when we put forth recommendations. We have to be mindful of the existing ecosystem, what else is going on and where it's going on. The commission is recommending that NRDC pay up to $50,000 for each reservist to attend a training and educational opportunity academy of sorts related to AI, or recommending that we pay student loans. These recommendations are going to be more difficult for evaluators to digest if it's not competitive, if it's not in line with similar programs like CyberCore, like Scholarship for Service, like Smart Scholarship for Service programs. They are based on proven matrices. Their stipends are yearly. The students' costs are known and quantifiable. We are talking about paying up to 3 years of studies. The best way for people to evaluate whether a program is worthy, and we think this line of effort and these recommendations is for it to first address the critical need and to be competitive and on par economically also with the other programs out there. We have, I think, a fiscal or fiduciary responsibility when we make recommendations. And this is why we chose to look at others and to make sure that we can address the needs on par with them.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I was going to ask later, that $50,000 to me sounded incredibly generous. But let's talk about that in a minute, because you mentioned NRDC. The two big recommendations here are the National Reserve Digital Corps and then the United States Digital Service Academy. Can we talk about the Reserve Digital Corps first? And that's modeled after the military reserves to create experts that'll serve in government part-time. One question I had is, the proposal is that reservists from the National Reserve Digital Corps would work a minimum 38 days each year for the government. I was just curious how you guys picked 38 days. Is that because it's a number that's used in other programs, or was there some logic?
Right. That number was picked on a 2-day per month schedule, coupled with a 14-day period at some point during the year. And honestly, it's in line and very similar to military reservist schedules. We want to allow those reservists to balance their need to spend enough time with government agencies to make meaningful progress with the need to maintain their other career. It appeared to be the most blended, least disruptive type of, and again, consistent and in line with other tracks. And we think that strikes the best balance. We use the others as models.
I see. And the recommendations mentioned background checks for the reservists. Is background checks the same as security clearance? And if so, what level of security clearance would reservists need in order to work in the government, or would it be on a case-by-case basis?
Well, keep in mind that not all military personnel have security clearances, and not all military members are U.S. citizens. So in line with that, or aligned with that, not all civilian digital reservists would require security clearances to do meaningful work. That is part of what, I just wanted to affirm there. And so when you're dealing with foreign intelligence operatives, this recommendation does not expose our civilian workforce to any new risk, and infiltration of the government civilian workforce must be considered. It's got to be considered anytime the government brings in new hires into service. So you've got to take all of that into account, which is why that recommendation has been put forth.
Yeah, I see. So the reservists would have a background check, whether or not they're U.S. nationals or foreign nationals, and then whether or not they needed any particular clearance would depend on their job.
Right. Just like on the military track, it's not offline.
Yeah. And then the thing that I really was impressed with is the idea of having a scholarship program modeled after the Reserve Officer Training Corps, the ROTC, with back-end obligation to spend 5 years in the NRDC upon graduation. I mean, that's been so successful for the military, and it's been so successful for students who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford education. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with that idea and how it would be implemented? How many schools you expect would take that up?
One of the things, being from a relatively small rural state that I speak about all the time, is access to opportunities. Not all of us live on roads paved in gold. We need to recognize that, talent comes in all forms and all places from all people, but their circumstances are not the same. And so, this particular model that is patterned after, we used to call it ROTC when I was in school. So I'm dating myself. These recipients, very worthy recipients, they would be able to participate in summer internships with government agencies, which would give them exposure that they might not organically have within their spheres of influence. After graduation, the recipients, yes, would have an obligation in the National Reserve Digital Corps for 5 years. And once they complete that obligation, they will be able to continue to work at NRDC, stop working in the NRDC, or transition to competitive service. Everybody wins here. The flexibility is there. If they want to continue on the government track, they can. After 5 years, if they want to explore other opportunities, they can. But this is a very positive on-ramp for those who might not be as fortunate people as you and me, though I don't know you well, but that might have had pavement that looked a little different.
Yeah, I am fortunate, but my father was less fortunate, and he was a ROTC kid, so that's what got him through school.
Okay.
I don't understand how schools decide to take that up.
How the individual institutions decide?
Yeah.
I know that was a part of a discussion. I was at a particular foundation, and they were talking about these programs that not all of the colleges, especially the historically Black or minority serving institutions, not all of them have these programs as it stands now for various reasons. They're not, I'm going to make the assumption, inexpensive to maintain. It comes with certain obligations that the threshold may or may not be too high for certain institutions. The interest may or may not be high enough. So you're speaking of, again, blended challenges and opportunities. If we were to, look at a civilian track also, which is why I find this especially attractive, that you will allow for opportunities if someone does not want to necessarily serve their country in that way. Here we have an option for them to get the training that they have earned by their academic prowess, but it will allow them to serve differently. I'm not wired for a military track. Uncle Sam does not want me to serve that way. But there are other ways in which I am capable and have served for 19 years. And if we can assist the government in on-ramping with our AI deficits through these series of means, I think it's a positive step forward.
Well, that'll be really interesting. I mean, hopefully this will be approved by Congress, and it'll be fascinating to see who implements it, what institutions implement it. To your earlier point, the Commission is recommending that NRDC pay up to $50,000 to each reservist to attend training and educational opportunities related to AI or to pay off student loans. Is that a one-time stipend per reservist over the course of their career?
Again, I just want to emphasize that this is very much in line with similar scholarship for service programs like Cyber Corps, Scholarship for Service, Smart Scholarship for Service programs, SMART. In these programs, the stipends are based on a per year, per student cost basis, paid up to 3 years of study while the student is in school attaining his or her degree. Again, it would pay up to $50,000 for each reservist that is attempting to attain their study or training in a field related to AI, or it could pay the student loans as a one-time stipend per reservist over the course of their careers. The flexibility here, I think, is noteworthy. And so other educational opportunities, of course, would include conferences, seminars, degree and certificate granting programs, and other opportunities. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. The incentives that we offer are explicitly tied to continuing education to increase the perceived and actual competency of AI reservists. And ideally, it would attract those with an active interest in continuing education, especially those new practitioners seeking to establish themselves. So again, if I had a second word of the day, it would be dexterity. This will allow for differentiation and, again, a means to be unique within a number of tracks within this framework.
The other big idea is the United States Digital Service Academy, and you would model that on the U.S. military service academies, the Naval Academy, West Point, the Air Force Academy, that would create a new source for civil servants with technical knowledge. Can you talk about that? It would be an accredited degree-granting university based on government funding that would give free education in return for service. It sounds like really a transformative idea in this space.
Here, for some, is an uncomfortable truth. The government has struggled to attract enough technical experts to build the workforce it needs to modernize. That's an uncomfortable truth. The positives are there are opportunities to address that. But the government needs to be an engine for change. It needs to be a place and a source that produces a large number of technologists that will serve in government. Government can adapt and it can instill in its graduates a sense of mission and purpose. And I think that's an opportunity here where you have a win-win. There are a lot of people out there who want to serve their country, but they might not want to do it in some legacy ways. And so this is a concept and a proposal that takes the benefit of what we see that's worked in those 5 existing military academies, but it focuses on civil servants rather than military officers. One of the things that I find particularly compelling about the concept of a digital service academy is that, one, it is modeled after the 5 U.S. military academies, which is a template that works well. But it focuses on civil servants rather than military officers in order to create a new source of civil servants with technical knowledge, and it could serve as a mechanism for government modernization. So it really hones in on what some of the gaps are. And let's face it, there are gaps. And this would be an accredited degree granting university that, yes, receives government funding. It would be an independent agency in the federal government, and it would have the very critical mission to help meet the government needs for digital expertise. We're at a crossroads. We're at a critical crossroads where we are going to have to head on and very deliberately address those critical divides or gaps that we have. The education received here is at no monetary expense to the student. So those who are not as monetarily gifted or endowed will not have that burden of student loan debt, which is a heavy burden on so many individuals. But again, it does come with an obligation to serve as a civil servant for 5 years after graduation. But when you finish your obligation, you are debt free. And I can't tell you how many friends I had for a number of years that we were almost into our 40s before they retired their debt because of other obligations. So again, we're not trying to be a one size fits all. We know that, this is not going to address every single challenge we have, but it addresses a critical challenge for those who want to serve their country, serve it differently, get educated, and be better citizens. And so that is why I am so passionate about this line of effort and so passionate about this particular proposal.
And I can see, too, that the military academies are extremely prestigious, and this would be a way to bring people into government with a certain standing as opposed to people coming in sort of anonymously to work in the technical field and not feeling like they're being recognized in the way that they are in the private sector. Did you consult with any of the military academies to come up with this recommendation?
All of the recommendations that seem to be complementary or parallel to some of the characteristics in those military academies, the answer is yes. We did have a number of consultations with those academies, with those entities. We maintain a line of communications because all of this, from my point of view, is complementary, not competitive.
And you say that the graduates of this academy would come out with at least a secret clearance. How large of a class do you foresee? Is this a class of a few hundred, or are you looking at something larger than that?
We anticipate that the classes will begin in year 3 of the USDSA and will have an initial class of 500. The proposal includes a recommendation to establish an interagency committee under the Office of Personnel Management's leadership that will have those individual agencies identify their minimum and maximum requests by agency and career field. So again, this is a constant, continual give and take exchange in terms of inputs that in an ideal sense would seek to better match that training and the skill the student would gain to the needs of the agencies.
And these graduates would be fielded across agencies, or are there one or two agencies where you think they would be concentrated? I know there's talk elsewhere in the recommendations about the need for a more technically savvy diplomatic.
I will say that in the case of, say, the State Department, if the State Department needs a more techno-diplomatic type of individual, that request could be moved through that interagency committee, and then USDSA would attempt to produce that. This is a very fluid, interactive process that seeks to address the needs of said agency or agencies with curriculum or the type of personnel that they would need to ideally fit. So this attempts as best it can to match the educational experiences with the needs of the agency. That's very intentional. And to me, it's one of those rare times that you have the dexterity to be able to craft almost in real time what the needs and the ongoing challenges that are faced in these agencies.
I know there's been some concern about what setting up an academy like this would cost. You make the point in the recommendations that unlike a military academy, you don't need parade grounds and it'll have a much smaller real estate footprint. Are there any ballparks out there about what this would cost?
So I will affirm this. This will not be inexpensive.
Yeah.
It is our estimate that once founded, a digital service academy would not be significantly more expensive per graduate than other scholarship for service programs. But I'll pose this in a different way to you and for anybody listening. What is it costing us not to do it?
Yeah.
To me, that is the primary question. What is it costing us day to day to have these wide gulfs by way of talent and on-ramps? What is it costing us not to do it? And so to me, that's the first question, and the second one and the third.
Do you have any sense of how difficult this, particularly the academy, would be to accomplish politically?
So because of the acknowledgement that this would not be inexpensive, I suspect that evaluators would have a number of questions. The recommendation is very explicit and transparent. It outlines startup costs. It includes an assessment of the necessary requirements to create this infrastructure, the hiring of faculty, and all of the things needed to build this. At the end of the day, it's a bold recommendation that is very necessary. We absolutely need a steady pipeline of digital talent into the federal government. It is necessary in order for us to meet the U.S.'s needs for digital expertise. I go back to what I said earlier. We need to look at what it's costing us not to address it. The price is extremely high. And so if we don't, the price of avoiding acknowledgement and doing something about this is not going to shrink, it's going to grow. And so one of the things that I'll tilt my commissioner hat and say that, to be more colloquial and a little too casual, if we don't pay and invest now, I don't want to even see how high a price it will be if we don't address it. And so we need to be forward thinking. We need to look at the world around us, what other nations are doing. And we need to acknowledge that when you talk about government needs, what federal and some state governments need to stay competitive, safe, and efficient. We've got international challenges, but we've got domestic challenges. Again, with companies, with institutions of higher learning. It is a competitive universe out there. And I, as a person who embraces my freedoms, would want and am working with other commissioners to invest and ensure a digitally AI-ready workforce. It is very necessary, it is proven, and it will not happen by words alone.
That's it for this week's podcast. I want to thank Mignon for her time. If you want to learn more about this episode, you can find a transcript on our website, Eye on AI. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to contact us with comments or suggestions. If you want to learn more about the NSCAI's work, please visit the Commission at www.nscai.gov. And remember, the singularity may not be near, but AI is about to change your world, so pay attention.